This picture depicts the proposed project compared to the 2005 gazetted EWA corridor. As part of the assessment of alternatives analysis process, the corridor was refined as technical study information was collected to avoid impacts where feasible and reasonable. These refinements from the 2005 gazetted EWA corridor include shifting the location of the corridor farther to the south to avoid right-of-way acquisition from the National Trust-owned properties, shifting the corridor where applicable to limit habitat fragmentation within the central mangrove wetland and impacts to parrot nesting habitat, and shifting the location of the corridor to avoid active quarry encroachment. Removing the 1.5-mile northern spur connection to the Frank Sound Road within the Mastic Reserve and Mastic Trail also reduced impacts. And the full figure for these avoidance and minimization measures can be found in the meeting handout and on display board number 5. So as we move into the discussions of the mobility improvements from the project, it's important to understand the broad factors that influence transportation. There are a number of factors that influence congestion. Some things make congestion worse, and some of these elements actually make congestion better. So one of the key factors that is essential to reduce congestion and improve mobility includes creating a resilient transportation system. This will improve travel time reliability by providing a route that can provide redundancy during construction, crashes, or other interruptions along the current coastal road, as well as providing continuity of operations during or after storm events. Any of you who were participated in the terms of reference public meetings, we heard very clearly from the public the quality of life issues that people in North Side, Boddentown, and the East End are confronted with every day as they commute to work. Not only do they have long commuting times, but if there's an event, an incident, or a crash that occurs, it can seriously cause congestion for them. And providing resiliency in that circumstance would significantly improve their quality of life. Conversely, only providing one route for the 8,000 plus people living east of Hearst Road means that any time that there is an accident, flooding, or other incident, these travelers then experience significant delay. Another factor that influences congestion and improves mobility is improving the transit system to make the use of transit, such as buses, more competitive when compared to traveling by car, so that transit could possibly become a mode of choice for people rather than simply a mode of necessity. The increased use of transit would certainly reduce congestion. The proposed project includes the potential for accommodations for dedicated transit. Conversely, maintaining the status quo for transit service will not encourage more people to use transit for travelers that have other choices that are available to them. It's important to keep in mind that the provision of improved transit service is outside the ambit of the NRA. Another factor that influences mobility is the distribution of employment and points of interest. So if you think about it from the perspective of people travel to go from somewhere to somewhere. And so the distribution of where those points where people want to go to is a key factor. So distributing employment and other points of interest in the eastern districts creates better opportunities for people and helps reduce congestion. If employment and other points of interest continue to develop along the status quo, then the cost of solving the current bottlenecks between Boddentown and Georgetown will be even more difficult and costly to resolve. It's important to note that land use planning is outside of the ambit of the NRA. Another factor that can help reduce congestion would be encouraging people making short trips to use non-motorized or micromobility rather than cars or buses. And the difference between those terms is non-motorized travel or people that are riding bikes or walking, and micromobility typically refers to people that are riding e-bikes or electronic scooters. So encouraging people to use micromobility or walking rather than cars or buses helps reduce local congestion and also improves public health. The proposed project includes the ability to provide dedicated path for non-motorized travel, as well as a dedicated path for micromobility such as e-bikes or electric scooters. If safe and separate accommodations for biking, walking, or using micromobility are not provided, then these will not be the first choice of travel for people making short trips. So in short, the proposed project does meet the critical success factors established for the project. It provides an alternate route for travel that includes improving travel for daily commuters, as well as providing a second route in the event of road closures or flooding along the coastal road, including improving emergency response time during these events. It shifts traffic from the coastal road to the EWA, which will be designed to modern safety standards, which will reduce crashes and allow for a safer trip for people. And also for the residents along the coastal road, By shifting traffic from the coastal road to the east-west arterial, the residents and businesses along that road will have an improved quality of life because there will be less traffic and less congestion in front of their front doors. The proposed project accommodates future demand. It includes provisions for dedicated transit lane. It improves non-motorized access to key destination, and it provides more reliable travel times and provides the possibility for choices in mode of travel, such as premium transit, which will improve quality of life by providing improved access to jobs and services in Georgetown. So the next steps for the project include collecting and evaluating the comments that we received on the draft ES. We'll then take those comments in hand and we'll prepare a final environmental statement and environmental management plan. Once that's done, if the ministry decides to move forward with or the government decides to move forward with the project, they would then complete detailed design of the roadway and mitigation commitments, and they would construct the project including any mitigation commitments when and if satisfying the traffic and development demand requirements. So how to leave a public comment. Public input is critical to the EIA process. The NRA and Department of Environment want your feedback on the draft environmental statement for the EWA extension. Feedback on the EWA extension can be submitted through the email, mail, or by submitting in person to the address on the screen, and comments will be accepted until February 3rd, 2025.
Thank you very much to Lindsay Ulizio, Mr. Scott Thompson-Graves, and Mr. Brent Barrett. At this time, I'd like to acknowledge the Honorable Minister, Dwayne Seymour, who has joined us. We will now move on to the two questions from the audience. We have a panel of representatives, as you see up here with us. They're present here this evening to address all of your questions in a timely manner. Those received from the hall here this evening, and also those that are submitted through the online platform. As a reminder, you can access via the QR code, and for those online, the link to the question and answer platform can be found via the homepage of the NRA website, caymanroads.com. As a reminder, the Wi-Fi network here is BTCCC_guest, and the password is Samson, SAMMSON, #172. Staff, again, is available here this evening to assist you if you're not familiar with how to use that platform. We ask that everyone here this evening uses the microphone that will be available to you. It'll be handed around. This is to ensure that your questions are on record and therefore considered as part of the public consultation process, but also that you're heard on the live stream for those who are watching and listening at home or in the office, wherever they are, because if you're speaking without a microphone, they simply can't hear what you have to say. Another element to this entire process really is, you're making your comments here publicly, you're sending them in on the online platform, but you have to submit those comments in writing as well to the platforms or the resources that are available to you. So comments in the box here tonight, via online, hand-delivered to the office information that I shared with you earlier. So again, there's a step 2 to this entire process. You can speak and share what you have to verbally, but it has to be in writing as well to be submitted into the process. Yeah? So we'd also like to assure everyone that if we're not able to answer all of your questions received online this evening, that every question and comment received will be captured and given due consideration as is required as part of the public consultation process. Your input, of course, is invaluable, and we thank you for it. So we'd like to now welcome our panelists who have joined us, as you heard earlier, from the team from Whitman, Riquad and Associates, LLP. That's Scott Thompson-Graves, Lindsay Ulizio, Monica Del Real, Alexandra Shosak, Brent Barrett, Carter Lilac, Dodie Frawley, and Taylor Sprinkle. They're all here. From Resource Environmental Solutions, LLC, we have Andrew Calhoun. From AMR Consultant Engineers, we have Shamara McCarthy. From Thailand, we have Paul Archibald and Jeffrey Marcus. From the National Roads Authority, we have Denny Tebow and Edward Howard. And from the Environmental Assessment Board, we have Gina Ebanks-Petrie and Mr. Tim Austin from the Department of Environment, as well as Hendrik Van Genderen, Yasmin James from the Water Authority Cayman, Richard Mildman from the Planning Department, and Loren Dabrowski from the Department of Environment. Okay, so now it's time for your questions. We'd like to ask anyone from the audience if you have a question. This gentleman has a question right here. If we could get a mic to him, please. Behind you.
Good afternoon, good evening. First of all, I certainly appreciate that the presentation and the efforts that have gone into studying this important subject to us. There's a high degree of professionalism, and I'd like to congratulate Mr. Howell and the rest of the team for the presentation. Importantly, that the study does not appear to really go into some of the other auxiliary related issues that are obviously important to the community. In particular, the impact of the road as it will impact transportation and waiting times and so on in the future. It's a very interesting question because clearly much of that is going to depend on other factors, like exactly what happens in terms of the town planning, so to speak, for that particular road. I note that that is something that is obviously outside the mandate of the NRA, and I raise it because clearly if those things are not taken into consideration and carefully studied in this particular project, it might well be that that billion-dollar project could be a real issue for us in the future. We've spent a lot of money. $1 billion is quite a lot of money. And I make the observation, and that's based upon some of the analogy and evaluation which was raised in the Compass recently. And it raises an element of concern for me because I looked at some of the figures and some of the time savings, so to speak, some of the shavings that would occur from implementing this road. And one of the things that was there was that it seemed to me that under one analysis, we could be shaving somewhere like 5 or 6 minutes off of the average time. Now I know there's averages and they're all over the place, and those are figures that you might or might not agree with. But taken on a very simple level, if you divide $1 billion between 4 to 5 minutes, you're talking about $250 million per shaved minute, and that's obviously very concerning. And I think what that leads to, obviously, is that not only do we have to make sure that we get the road and all of this fine work that is being done properly looked at, but we also consider the broader issues like public transport to make sure that in the future we're able to build upon and have a long-term solution. We know as a matter of fact that building roads hasn't really served us too well, because it seems as if the second that we get the new road built, we have the additional traffic, we keep importing traffic, and we can import cars much faster than we can build roads. So these are larger issues, and I respect that they may be outside the pay grade, so to speak, of of what is what you have been reviewing and what you've been studying and what you've been producing. But I raise it because it's very important to us. In terms of my question, one of the elephants in the room, so to speak, is the whole issue of how we deal with our waste, the landfill. It seems that that's an issue that we've obviously kicked down the road for many, many years. The last 25 or 30 years it's been on the agenda. It still hasn't been fixed. We still don't have a plan, a program to really deal with it. And I wonder if, just as a matter of a question, whether the study looked at that impact of how they would be dealing with the additional waste and so on, which would be generated from all the additional houses and so on, which would go into would be going into effect. I note that my father used to say it well, and how he would say it was that if you have $1 million of crap and you put another $1 million of crap on it, you're going to have a lot more crap. And I say that.
Mr. Ebanks, thank you so much for your question. We'd just like to give the opportunity to others in the room to get their questions answered and asked as well.
Perhaps if I can just finish off by simply saying whether the issue of the environmental issue, including issues of how our landfill needs will figure into this particular 8-mile stretch of road, if there's been any element of looking at that, because obviously they are integrated and integral and important to the whole consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to answer the question?
I can.
It's on.
Is it on? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you for your question, and you've posed an important question. However, evaluating the impacts of any potential land use or growth was not part of the terms of reference or the scoping opinion from the EAB. So those aspects weren't part of our were not part of our project or our ambit to evaluate.
Thank you very much for your answer, Mr. Thompson Graves. Who's next with the question? Gentleman in the blue.
Good night. I wanted to thank you all again. I wanted to address a point that was raised at the meeting on Tuesday night. So for those persons that weren't there, but I hope it'll still be helpful. But there was a question raised by a member of an environmental group about the selection of the route, the cabinet selection of the route, as to why did cabinet not go with the route that was recommended by the EAB, so the cabinet, I don't know if you can put that on the screen or not, but the cabinet selected route B3 alternative instead of B2. Could I I've printed some of the notes from the study as well, but I would like to ask the question first and foremost as to the consultants, your view on the two routes, B2 and B3. If you could expand on that a bit first.
Thank you, Mr. Scotland.
So, as far as for those who haven't studied the maps in detail, the primary difference between Route B2 and B3 is the project is broken up into two sections. Within Section 2, both B2 and B3 are identical to one another. So there's no difference in that section of the project. And the difference between B2 and B3 is just which side of the quarries that the route goes along. But most of the impacts between those two were very similar to one another. But there was a difference as we had identified in the project and the shortlist alternatives evaluation.
Thank you. I just wanted to read some of the this is from the it was part of the for most of you that have gone onto the website, there's about 6,000 pages, as she remembered, as she mentioned, so I looked through and I found some of the pages. And this is a memorandum that was from WRA regarding, and it was a high-level summary report of the study findings for the selection of a preferred alternative.
Mr. Scotland, is that a very condensed document?
Yeah, I'll only read the last 80 pages.
Okay.
So it said high-level summary of shortlist evaluation for alternatives B2 and B3. From a critical success factor and engineering constraint perspective, B2 and B3 are comparable to one another. Both are expected to provide improved resilience and opportunities for multimodal accessibility with separated dedicated facilities for transit, bicycles, and micro-mobility modes of travel. That's one. From a traffic-specific critical success factor evaluation perspective, B2 and B3 are comparable to one another and projected to provide the same outcomes for the following established critical success factor considerations: large beneficial effects on alternative travel routes, large beneficial effects on resiliency, large beneficial effects on supporting current and future traffic, and so on and so forth. All large beneficial effects, that's both of the routes. From a socio-economic impacts perspective, alternatives B2 and B3 are comparable to one another due to the anticipated similar yet significantly improved accessibility, so on. From a natural environment impacts perspective, alternatives B2 and B3 are expected to result in similar impacts to the natural environment resources. From a cost-benefit analysis, both alternatives B2 and B3 are expected to result in a benefit-cost ratio of 1.3, identical, where a benefit-cost ratio above 1.0 represents the anticipated benefits being greater than the anticipated costs. So when you give the cabinet that tool to make a decision, and when you're saying that the decision-making process is with the cabinet, and they only use, as Lindsay said earlier, in quote what she said that you give them that tool, put the information in the hands of the decision makers. When they were presented with that information, I'm sure they used that to make the decision for B2 over B3. And as you said yourself, there's not very much difference between either of them. While the question the other night was almost pointing to the fact, or making the point that cabinet had gone against the recommendation, which they did. They didn't take the recommendation of the EAB, but in so doing, in reading what I just read out there, it's not as if they made a decision, critically wrong decision in choosing B2 over B3, according to what Scott just said as well.
Thank you, Mr. Scotland. Who's next with a question, please? Please raise your hand. Anyone from the audience have a question?
The gentleman in the back.
Yes? Sir, please go ahead.
Yes, good evening. The question I have has to do with the way in which these roads will cater for public transport. I know Mr. Eubanks touched on that earlier, but how do these roads improve the possibility of better utilization of public transport?
Thank you very much for your question. As shown on the display board in the back, the potential ultimate build-out option that could become available based off of travel demand and available funding provides the opportunity to accommodate transit lanes, one in each direction as part of the corridor.
In addition to that, it's important to note that the benefits for car transportation would also be benefits for bus transportation, because the buses would receive the same congestion relief depending on whether the transit would reorient their routes to take advantage of using the new roads. But that decision would be outside of the ambit of the NRA, but the opportunity would be there for them to also achieve significant travel time savings.
Okay, thank you very much for the question and the answer. I'd like to acknowledge the arrival of Mr. J. Eubanks, Minister J. Eubanks. Questions from the audience? Mr. Rankin?
Yes, good night. I'm not here as an MP tonight. I'm here as a person who lives in the District of East End and who has an impact. That this traffic impacts me pretty much every day. But as part of the environmental impact assessment, did any of you interview anybody who lives in the East End or North Side?
During the terms of reference, there were 2 public meetings that were held that had received feedback and comments from the folks who had attended or who had written comments in for documentation, and those were addressed as part of the final terms of reference, in which then this phase of the EIA process, which we are in now, evaluated based off of the finalized terms of reference.
Hello? So you did not interview anyone from those districts? The display out here tonight, I almost turned around and went back home, because when you put something like that there, that gives the wrong impression of what this road could cost to build, will turn people off. And certainly from my perspective, I believe that is the whole intent of this, so that we don't build that road that we need so bad, right? This affects the quality of life for the people that live in the Eastern districts. The people who have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, get their children out of bed, put them in the back of the car, bring them to town, give them breakfast, and then get them to school. This is who this affects. But it seems as if there's something else on the foot that wants to not build this road.
So,
Thank you, Mr. Rankin. Who's next?
Oh, absolutely.
Question from the audience? Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your comments, sir. We greatly appreciate it. I'm actually going to go back to show a slide. And I apologize, I will go hopefully slower. So
go to the 2-lane. The 2-lane section? No. The cost, yeah. There we go. Yeah. Okay, yeah, so understanding the comments that we had received at the last public meeting, we had produced this information, which is information that is broadly available in the draft environmental statement, and will certainly better reflect in the final environmental statement the more realistic cost of the good fit, in addition to just the excellent fit, so that we'll be able to, to mitigate that sticker shock that everybody receives. So we certainly heard those concerns loud and clear, and we'll reflect that in the draft ES, or the final ES.
Their questions
I hear what you're saying, but that does not mitigate what happened when the horse got out of when the horse bolted a few weeks ago, when the environmentalists, the extremists, I call them, decides to print something saying that there was $1 billion to this road over whatever amount of time. This is what I know it should cost to build when the presentation was made to us, right? So this should have been in that. This should have been in release when the rest of the information was released, right? No, that gives people fodder to talk. Okay. I had to catch myself there. This gives people a lot of ammunition, not this, but the display that you had out here, a lot of ammunition to talk a lot of foolishness, right? And to get people to go against this road. But as long as I live, and as long as I represent the people of the Eastern District, I will support this road getting built, right? Because we suffer too much every morning having to drive down from traffic. And I also challenge any one of you, any single one of you, I'll pay for you to stay in a hotel in East End tonight, and you leave in the traffic 5:30 tomorrow morning.
Thank you again, Mr. Rankin. Who else from the audience would like to ask a question?
Good evening.
I don't know if you're the guys, I need to ask this question too, but we're talking about billions of dollars or millions of dollars. How or where is this money coming from? How is it going to be raised? You know, we need the road. The road has to be built. It's not going to be cheap. Where is the money going to come from?
Thank you for your question, Mr. McCoy.
So that's a cabinet decision. It's outside the ambit of what we had studied for this project.
Did you hear the reply, Mr. McCoy?
I realize that you're just a consultant and stuff, but at the end of the day, we need to know. So somebody going to have to answer that question. The ministers are here, the government people are here. Somebody can give us some idea of where the money is going to come from. Also, just for my edification, I saw in one of the slides about the construction of the road, it had something about geosynthetic solutions. To remove peat. What exactly is geosynthetic solutions?
Thank you for your question.
Hello. Yes. Thank you for your question. Geotextiles are used across this island to reduce the actual excavation of peat and stabilize roadway surfaces, building surfaces, and that's to reduce construction costs. So in this area, you have typically fill overlaid a layer of peat, which can vary from 1 foot to 14 feet at its deepest, and that overlays the bedrock. The bedrock is the sound ground on which we construct, and so in lieu of that, we have to create a stable construction surface, and the geotextiles allow us to do that while minimizing construction costs.
Thank you for your answer. We have a lot of questions on Slido, but one of them is, if our questions are not answered tonight, how do we get answers later, and will a public report come out with answers?
The comments will be noted and they will be taken into consideration for the final environmental statement that is the next step of this project along with the environmental management plan.
Okay, thank you. More questions from the floor? Minister Seymour is next.
Good evening. Thank you. Why I'm here is not to ask a question, but to run with a group in the next election who's willing to build this road, whoever that group is, and consider the people of the eastern districts. No sleep, lack of family time, leaving home in the dark, getting back home in the dark. 1 more hour sleep is what I asked for. For my people, we need to stop the scaremongering. And we need to realize that people are tired. People are tired. There's a lot of accidents. Let us ask ourselves why. We have so much accidents on the road because people are getting up so early. The children are crazy. They're getting up at 4 o'clock. They don't know when to get up. You all need to have young children living in these areas to see how it's affecting them, rather than coming here and scaremongering with this $1 billion foolishness. All right? Let me tell you, the road will not cost $1 billion because we won't have 100 bridges involved in the new design. We are going to build this road by hook or by crook, and we need to elect the right people to ensure that this road is built for many, many reasons. You all weren't here with Hurricane Ivan when no one could cross for days. All these things need to be taken in consideration. But I don't see the empathy. I don't see it. And yes, we need to concern ourselves with transportation, ensuring we have adequate transportation. We need to concern ourselves with what we learned during COVID in terms of staggered shifts, etc. We also need to stop scaremongering people about if you build 13 miles of road, there going to be another 1,300 cars coming on the island. We can change the laws and amend it and stop certain imports. So stop scaremongering people. Let's get this road built. You're wasting money on this EIA. We're wasting money.
Thank you, Mr. Seymour.
Evening, everyone. Donna, I think earlier you said that any questions that were asked at the Tuesday night's meeting, and I didn't have any questions, but there were a number of other people there that had, also has to be written in order for it to be documented, because that was not what was told by the moderator on Tuesday night. So there were a lot of passionate people in the North and Eastern districts on Tuesday night, and it would be really amiss if we're not going to document their concerns when, in fact, they were not told that they had to put it in writing. So I just wanted to clarify it.
Is there someone in the panel that can address that particular question? Yes, the next step that I was told is that you have to, in a consultation period, put those comments that you have in writing. I really can't answer for you how that's going to be handled from Tuesday night to tonight. All I can tell you is that any comments that you have to make, they have to be in writing. The next step has to be in writing and be submitted.
And also, too, the Slido app allows to have the documentation of the comments and questions within the Slido app as well, so those are documented. And the public consultation period, you have until February 3rd to provide comments and feedback and questions as well.
Is this meeting being recorded?
Yes.
So why can't the notes from this meeting and the questions be transcribed? It's not a 10-hour meeting, it's 2 hours. And I think you would miss a lot of this if you didn't get if that wasn't done, because a lot was said at the meeting on Tuesday night that if that's not recorded and the comments kept from that, it would be missed, like Sean just said.
Mr. Scotland, thank you for your suggestion and your comments. I'm sure that those that are responsible will be doing what they need to do to make sure that the comments are recorded, transcribed. It may be in that format. I'm not quite sure. I can't answer that question for you. But the aim here is to have everyone in this room involved, have everyone from Tuesday's meeting involved, and your questions and concerns addressed. How that's going to happen, that's not my remit. All right, thank you. Any more questions? Yes.
Thank you. Firstly, I would ask, I think the second speaker, just to repeat the definition of this 50-year storm, whatchamacallit, because what I heard from that was 2%, and 2% seems like a very low chance of it happening, whether it's over 50 years or whether it's over 1 year. So that's the first part of my question. And secondly, the majority of the cost seems to be to do with the elevation of the road. I'm not an expert, obviously, but my question is, what is the evidence that the road actually ideally needs to be 15 to 20 feet in elevation? Based on storms that we've had in the past, I mean, we've been through the worst of it. I wasn't here for Hurricane Ivan, but what was the maximum level of water in that Category 5 hurricane? Did it ever come up to 15 feet above sea level? What is the current elevation of that part of the island? I mean, I just kind of finding it hard to wrap my head around all of this, because 2% seems like a really small chance of something happening to spend $1 billion on it.
Thank you for your question.
So I'll take care of your first question regarding the 50-year storm event. So the 50-year storm event, there's a 2% chance of that event happening in any given year. Okay, so it is pretty low, and it would be sort of a moderate level storm. Obviously, there's storm events that are 100 year, 500 year, 1,000 year, but they also go down to 25 and 10 and lower, even 5 or 2 year storms for that matter. The 2 year storm event is a lot more frequent, stuff that you would see obviously more frequently. I think the 25 years, there's a 4% chance. The 10 year storm would be, there's a 10% chance each year that it could happen. So it's all based on the rainfall intensity and how long the storm hangs around. But that's also since you're an island, and it can be combined with storm surge. So if there's a hurricane and high winds, depending on the direction of the storm, that water can surge over the coast and flood those areas. So that can have an additional effect on that storm event.
And that's the reason we went through the optioneering analysis, and that's the reason that the next step in the process, if the project moves forward, would be for the National Roads Authority to do a risk assessment and weigh the benefits of the costs of those specific questions, the specific elements that you just highlighted. As you noted, the higher storm event resulted directly in higher costs because of the structures and the additional fill material. So that would be part of the next step of the process for the NRA.
Okay, we have a question from Slido that we'd like to take at this time before we move back to the audience. This question asks, it says, in other words, not building excellent fit will fail the critical success factor. So why show the other options? And what is the actual success factors being used?
So the critical success factor is for building a resilient roadway. And so building to a lower design storm, as Brent mentioned, maybe a 10-year storm, would still be a more resilient roadway than the roadway is today. And resiliency is not just a factor of drainage or storms, it's also a factor of what if there's an accident on the coastal road today? The citizens of Boddentown or East End or North Side are just stuck in traffic, and they might be there for hours or longer. If you make the road more resilient by creating the east-west arterial, people would have an alternate route to bypass that and still be able to get home. And so resiliency is defined at a broad level, not just strictly from storms.
Thank you for your answer. More questions from the audience as we get ready to wrap up. Anyone? Yes?
Hi, good night. As a young Caymanian, it's very interesting to me that as time goes on, it appears that the only place in our country we're going to probably maybe be able to afford property is going to be in the eastern districts. And for some reason, because of that, everybody else that can afford the 1 million are going to be able to have a better experience living in this country than the people who are having to be forced to. I'm a proud Easterner first and foremost, but for everybody else, we are the ones that are having the worst living experience because of the traffic problem. I have been living in East End my entire life, and I have been up at the crack of dawn every single day to go to school and now to go to work. And I am a hardworking person like many other Caymanians in this building and at home. And I think at some point, all of the extra, when is this ever going to be done? When is it going to be done? We just saw a list that's still running down the length of this page. We're not done. When?
Thank you for your question.
So, I mean, the question is really a question for the decision makers. It's not a question for a study team.
Okay. Well, did you hear the gentleman? He said the question, the answer to that question can only come from the decision makers, which would be members of cabinet or cabinet itself. Yeah. Unfortunately, we can't hear you without the mic. Do you have another question? Sir? Thank you for your question, ma'am.
Yeah. Just very quickly, could you just repeat the timeline for the different phases? And in particular the Wilkie connection?
The initial phase is anticipated for 2026, and that would be one lane in each direction. Even though the Wilkie connector was considered as part of Section 2 of this EIA, it is optional for future consideration.
Thank you for the question, sir, and for the answer.
The horizontal geometry doesn't change of the roadway, so what you're seeing, on the plans is that the profile certainly would change based on the design storm. So what'll end up happening is the NRA is only going to build the road in a phased approach. Instead of building all the lanes at once, they're going to build one lane in each direction. So typically with the level of information that we have at this stage in a project, because they need to collect detailed information for design calculations, you typically go with a broader approach. That way it's more likely that you're going to fit within that envelope that you establish as the project goes forward. That way we don't have to spend an eternity studying it again and again if the impacts shift or if they would get broader. So it's typical that you would take a more elbows out approach for establishing the impacts, which will then become less as the project actually gets implemented. Yeah. And the reduction in elevation will be taken to a higher level of detail in the final document as well. So.
Sir, I hope that answers your question. You have a question, Mr. Bodden? Can we get the microphone to Mr. Bodden?
Thank you. Hello.
Oh, we have Mr. Bodden in the back and Mr. Bodden in the front. So
Yeah. Sorry,
Bodden in the back first.
My question is on this 20-foot elevation. Is this an aggregate-based elevation, or has a second option of an elevated surface that has been explored that would still allow the free movement of water? Because that seems very expensive. You're in an area where you have to demuck the land.